Everybody, thank you for coming to the opening session of this fifth iteration of Interrupt. We started in 2008 and have had these irregular sessions. My name's John Cayley. I'm a professor and chair of literary arts, where I run a digital language arts track. I mentioned that I'm chair, and it's normally considered to be a sort of burden, a thing that many academics try to avoid. I'm kind of chuffed because someone who self-identifies as a digital language artist has just been made the head of a creative writing department in an Ivy League university, which seems to me a little bit significant and worth mentioning, I thought. Anyway, I wanted to invite you all, to welcome you all here, and to mention just one administrative thing, which is that if you haven't given your email address into our registration table, then please do so. That's just so that we can contact you after the event and let you know if there are videos online or whatnot, or keep in touch with you in the future. Okay, so you know, there's no registration fee, but if you could just give your email address, that would be great. And Theodora Walsh, who is the chief curator, ably assisted by Claire Donato, they will be giving a sort of a much more interesting sort of welcoming address to the gathering at 6 o'clock. Yeah. I should thank everybody. I mean, the biggest thanks goes to Theodora, and we'll have other opportunities to thank her later. But the Literary Arts Department supports this event. The Brown Arts Initiative and the Pratt Institute has also been cooperative and is bringing their students for they're bringing students for later sessions. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Cam Scott, who's moderating this session, and he'll introduce us all briefly. Thank you.
Hello, thank you, John. I am actually just going to introduce each artist before their respective performances. So we will, without further ado, start with Merrily Armstrong Riel. Is that, are you third? Is Javi for, the order changed since I was. There will be no further gotchas. I apologize to Merrily. Jhave is a digital poet, once again based in Montreal, a city very dear to my heart, formerly working in Hong Kong. He plays with language, images, video, theories, tentacles, food, integrity, time, paths, love, and intransigient synchonicity. Those are all heady keywords. And without further ado, join me in welcoming Javi to the stage.
Oh my God, that's bright. Can we take a little bit of light off of me? It's nice and everything, but okay. This will take a moment. I didn't know I was going first. I thought we'd switched. So we'll find a path. Thank you very much for the intro. It's a pleasure to be here. There is a participatory component to this. So at some point I'm going to invite all of you, everyone, to enter into this particular little game. My laptop is now plugged in, and thus we begin this presentation. Wow, that's super bright. Okay, so I'm gonna start. I've got a project called Rewrites, but this is the participatory human plus AI aspect of that project. So that is why I'm gonna ask you at some point to read. This is the only time I have ever done it, so this will get tricky. Don't really need light there, but it's lovely. Oh my God, it's fluctuating in here. There's a climate system going on. Okay, so basically this project, I take a lot of machine learning and deep neural nets and apply them to a custom corpus of language, and it'll eventually be published in 12 months. I managed to write a bunch of books. I usually worked between 6 a.m. to 8 a.m. and that was about 6 days a week, regular practice of sitting down with no internet and kind of what I called carving the poems. So you're faced by this monolithic block of text and you begin to carve it. Here's an example of that carving process done in real time, whether I kind of gather an idea of what path I do not write. And in this place of concave tissue at the end of the sea, bitterness calls to me, makes us feel emotional, nervous perhaps because I'm talking in front of people. We think of the neuroepithelial bones feeling normative. We think of the prisoners, a vowel, if it is like a moment. So it's a way of constructing or finding little crevices of poetry within this kind of self-made, disheartened, elegiac, belching password. So that's the game, right? That's the structure of the game, is just to just sort of pan for gold or something in the midst of that debris. In 1 year, over 4,500 poems were created, 1 book a month, all 12 books published by Antiism, which is an art book press in Montreal in spring 2019. Here's one of the books. We're not going to watch all of it, but there's actually like 300 pages. This is kind of the layout. So it's just flicking by, too fast to read. Why AI? Why? Simply enough, I feel it's just an extraordinary tool for augmenting human creativity. It might be a bit threatening in some ways to the subjective modernist aspect of genius, but it is genuinely a wonderful, playful companion on the path of literary process. I do have to offer a disclaimer in these contentious times where terms are used as ideological leverage. The views and opinions expressed by this algorithm, they arise spontaneously and do not necessarily reflect my own. So I think I would suggest that we all approach the output of this algorithm with a kind of generosity, as if there's a 3-year-old idiosyncratic genius child who has somehow absorbed the vocabulary of millennia, right? So, and some of it can go a little bit fast. Here's an example of that kind of speed. This is the real-time output from a NVIDIA Titan X GPU. It's kind of a thread low talk blueprint, breakprint, blanched out virality faker of the tasty side postures blossoming from the appearance wreathed rain of matrimonial wild Euphrates taken consumption shade in the search conifers. And this goes on and on. This is like a 2-hour video. The amount of material is daunting. And this is now your time to interrupt. Please, there's a microphone here, which I hope is working. And maybe we could swivel the documentation cameras toward whoever might speak. Or if someone feels incredibly exhibitionist, please take my place here. Interrupt me, because this is what we'll be looking at, this sort of thing. The boxes and the workers of the old house. I'm not going to talk forever. I really do require you to come up here to interrupt me in my scattered talking about the old symbols. I can't make this up forever with this line, the ancient comets, rocky coming to me, the lost Magrittes and the forest duplicity with the visionary scribble and the full juicy mazes. It's not easy to be a poet, but it's easier with this, eh? Like it's like some sort of augmented cybernetic virtual muse, in the phrase of Charles Hartman. So really, please, no one's going to help me. I'm all alone up here. I don't want to rub hands. Oh, Cam, thank you. There's a screen there. He can read from that, so you can see whatever you want, and we can even do a duet. Take over. Anyone interrupt?
At the station, I was a child, but that, the moon, the way I did in the light, was a sack of own persimmon. Early films lackluster, pies glisten, children lusty. She, myself, death and dove, birthday, dancer in sluggish threads, Goodwin beggars cause, garnered gnats, of my mouth is that the one woman who of this life has been given like a package of hot ice, let down in the skin, in the air, turned down like Maryland prime-numbered staples, especially Kenya's phony pair, try to see a new man. I implore anyone else to interrupt. Me.
Activities, Terminator, Sat Feb 2, 15:48:22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 29, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36, 37, 38, 39, 40, 41, 44, 45, Jhave at Jhave dash capital UBUNTU Ubuntu colon dash slash document slash GitHub slash AWD dash LSTM dash LM dash master 0.85192277943670 0.8635562182040235 period 0.97481656 1996 0.5826307321.2488 0 with a dot in the middle. Oh, the zeros have dots in the middle. They're breasts. 1.4292998 equal sign semicolon 17 1.26
Bludgeoned modernity. I, angels, morning, composing, neurochemistry. Side turned, I, this is the finest emperor in my decision, small boy. Spare me off. Knees, the monsieur soldier disavows yon white plain and a white meadow ridge, and the total fish. In November 21st. Trojan prosecution under Dada, gathering, fire, effect, impairments, fixed, faceted, heraldic pajamas, inequality to belief, to acting, witch gray, well-knit breasts, distraight teen ager. At is a vast craft, calcium. Thoughtful study of jade, flares, duplexes. Heed high-hearted lilts. Resinico.
Blanche, less astonishment, state trade, or hat sheep sut. The unhappy yet, the junk sidewalk. A magnificent child, I am with his own self. Name, it was like a young father, for temples, gone. And to be the Italian boy, I am with his own. Laurent, worth roots, austerities, or century, your veil drifts like the French thrush. Student, licking upon the grave, not problem. That's how I plunder their answer. As the sun opens to the end of the world. And the only way to sullenly Stonehenge connected to a quarter stole tail flick and drift. And my brothers from memory, science pain, canonical enchanted. Or as I successful, the Tarzan alone, waiting crescent. Leaves omniscient or exalted, for veiling anal part as aspergent islands. Refusal, frowns gauging Mozilla's roamer lonely. International gloves. Color couldn't. Wavelets and the flow and fight all now, 15 or later, dropping into the chords.
Color. Couldn't. In the bar, auroral, PVC translating, and outside made sound Brazil, China's breathed, why we were dear ballistic. Naive, TV, seemingly might, it backed from corner, freed, was non-reputing, seemingly might. You made a wife, inside or on your head, fall walls, 14 pastiche codicile, all his cruiser in Fajardo, harmony, seconds vanishing conviction, seconds vanishing conviction, seconds vanishing is translating. Months before our doughboys, sown the afternoon, months before, bags, deck chairs, covered rusticated, clink stirrup chink wisdom, model, a 2 represented when covered, snub-nosed, 5, 12-string is cryptograms, gate is Mary Flower Scheherazade, having migrated, hotel of the sea, tough gentleman, a secret, allegories battle of common tormented music or
Who
the
an
indenting.
orchestra has chosen reach
There.
still. Asleep, bags cloaked in cloud, jack-o'-lanterns, the whole world, the indenting. I think still,
and shrieked but not even none.
hung through the molds of the wheat stillness,
The flour mill.
human.
Hadn't lived, refined.
Michigan, child,
I take account indulged with one world.
with one world,
The white sea, grenadine with silver and frosting.
idiom,
Looking occasionally at the familiar acceptance.
keeps therefore summoned biodiversity and luminous in its passionate rigging
Rotting warts.
with the world.
The name, the mind of the world, we have the same failing.
Singer blows off, bids blockage, what they called a man,
Some lost conversation in his own body.
sleeping as it fell down.
And his luxuriant boy, parched.
Their face. Dallas sensuous dead. My body babies the earth, and breast unhandy ground clings like the breath of time.
Yet I keep you released, exultant, more serene and more complete.
Il mock. You're
This pantomime, the gnome of the city, hoisted, and the word will be a story, early falling from the harbor.
Hoisted in chips with confidence.
So many recruits embrace in the universe.
At runners recreating.
Prune-backed clitoris hug, beep, different ontological wave crests in progression, autopiloted men.
Fucked cows conjoints under love, the miracles of angels said.
The much famous ex-wife for pillows. Guttural students. One face in syntax, the nasal ekphrasis like the broke back beam. My father shot back and made it to the North Station. And the steady rain in the water, the sun turns deep and she stood on the roof and was taken back in the woods.
eel antlers.
Green protocols vibrated and bleed through songbirds. Saddled Hearts regularly reminds me of insects and all beautiful days if some sperm is present. Mountain and bridge has been a brick path, like a cool ride, imagining brush. No trousers, the language cleave, the wings, the soft word.
Yellow starless, clawhole turbulence, possessive. Beyond adult divulged drummed. Obsessed passing student, or in Maryland. Dualisms. If you're asked to draw, Emily knows. $300. I got up and sweep. Hellbenders. And we convertible. Women coming into sky. Window boxes. All the researcher. On a bench. Of the men. Coach wheels. Dustpan. Things seem simple.
Uno punto dos tres tres cuatro ocho seis nueve ocho cinco uno uno dos uno 0.85244503 112791 1.4946085799444675 0.623451723193193193.
I'm afraid I must interrupt because we've run out of time. Thank you all very much. That was extraordinary. That was really wonderful. Thank you to all the readers.
Thank you to everybody who helped to vocalize that. Up next is John Cayley, who makes digital language art, particularly in the domain of poetry and poetics. And I think that these are works of inviting rigor that I admire a great deal. Cayley is professor of literary arts here at Brown University. Without further ado, John Cayley.
So a little bit of setup. And I realized I'm not going to give a coherent presentation, although I am going to perform a PowerPoint that I gave at the MLA. This is going to, yes, come to life. So, some of you have heard this before, but at the MLA I had to make it 5 minutes, and I want to do it in a sort of a quasi-performative manner. Especially as we've just heard the voice, or we've heard voices that are coming out of a machinic process, or so it seems to me. It was amazing that there is an overall voice there, I think, somewhere, which needs commentary and critique. The language that machines read. The language the machines read at any particular moment is extracted from what Walter Ong would call a graphylect. A graphilect is a dialect, like a dialect. In other words, you have English, and then you have dialects of English, and then you have a graphilect, which is a graphic representation, a particular language practice that is expressed graphically. That a transdialect language formed by deep commitment to writing. That's Walter Wrong. A little more precisely, machines read encoded transcriptions of graphilectic languages, plural, if we do not constrain our attention to the absurdly global English graphilect. So they're not even conversant with graphilects, they're only conversant with transcriptions of graphilects. A transdialect language, consider that written languages might be better thought of as particular modes of language practice, or rather as other languages that you might not know, as in, I don't know French. And if you don't know French, no one considers you to be an incomplete human. Why should you be considered an incomplete human if you don't know the graphilect of your particular language? So what is language ontologically as a being? From experience and the science available to us, it is something interpersonal, depends on and constitutes society that we have evolved to have. We've got it, but it would not exist without others of us. It is something interpersonal that we have evolved to have. Thus, it must be brought into being by the active response of an other to persons or entities making formal gestures of virtual language. So I take the Jhave's algorithms to be making formal gestures of virtual language, but not necessarily language. Language must be brought into being by the active response of another to persons making formal gestures of language, persons or entities. And that's what we did. We made active response. We actively responded to a formal gesture of virtual language. This active response may be called reading. If we need to distinguish it from conventional reading, scanning and processing a graphilect, we will call it grammaleptic reading. Grammalepsy is not a disease. It's a condition. It's when you are seized, when you seize the gesture as a symbol in your language. That's the grammaleptic moment, when you seize the gramme. Reading. An established usage of this word obviously precedes its application to conventional reading. In other words, it was used in cultures where reading was rare and also not what we do at all. The now predominant usage and sense of the word is derived from something like the ability to make well-advised, convincing, articulable guesses based on signs or sign-like human gestures, or on the world's gestural forms. Data, not capta. The data, not capta, is because the world gives data, but what we can capture of that data is what we now call data. It's, in other words, raw data is an oxymoron. Grammalepsy, condition or circumstance. Grammalepsis, process, i.e. reading. Grammaleptic, adjective. Grasp, seizure of, by, gramme. These events of sudden, discrete grasp, seizure occur when gestures in any support medium become iterable, shared symbolic forms and simultaneously elements at any level of linguistic structure of language, thus bringing language into being. Grammalepsis generates grammae as shared symbolic events of language, bringing language into being, constitutive language, as opposed to designative. That's from Charles Taylor, and it's a distinction between the language as something which you describe, human behavior to describe, whereas language is actually something that we have that makes us more human, constitutive of the human. We become language animals, this is me, we become language animals when certain perceptible forms that we make suddenly give us access to a world that is more human because it is suddenly more language. So as you seize the grammae, you bring it into the being of language, and you become more human in the process of doing that. Grammalepsis of language is support media agnostic. Any perceptible medium will do, proved by sign language, obviously, which is full-on natural language. All traces of language constitute archewriting in Derrida's sense, and media agnostic amounts to synesthetic in Derrida's sense. In other words, language is not tied to any particular perceptible medium. It partakes of anything, any aspect of perception. Grammalepsis operates with différence, not difference. Différence is that which can be grasped, generated, introduced, grammalepted into as language. Documentary encoded literature is not constitutive language unless and until it can operate with and generate language from différence. Literature as such, right, in other words, literature that we read as makers of creative, of what's sometimes called creative writing, it gets to be fully human language because of history and because of all the différence that we can discover within it, which is very different from its documentary encoded transcription, which is what typically algorithms are working with. Literature as such, as we prejudicedly know it, earns this status through history and style, through voice, as the substantial medium of language, ontologically, as previously indicated. The voice, in other words, when you voiced the Jhave's algorithmic output, you brought it into language and you substantiated it within practices of language. Machines cannot read documentary encoded language, literature as language, unless and until they can, which they can't yet, for sure, for absolute sure. You can check on the latest NLP research. You can check on the latest machine learning research. They're still not getting even close. And part of the reason they're not getting close is because they aren't really using language as such. They're using a transcription of a graphylect, right? So that's the material. You can infer a lot from that, but you can't do it as well as we can. And they won't be able to do it as well as we can for quite a while. And they will not do so as long as a systematically stupid computational structuralist model of language and mind prevails. And that, it does prevail since the Second World War. Distant reading, this is just as an aside for the digital humanists amongst us, is not and hardly ever reading in any constitutive or aesthetically tractable sense of these terms. Usually it produces statements for the sociology of literature or decorative, literary, critical aesthetic, suggestively prescriptive sociology. A crisis for language, for artists of language, and also possibly for language. We face consequences due to the advent of transactive synthetic language, which is, and the reason it's particularly powerful at the moment is because it's in the form of actual synthetic voice, which sounds to us like it's human. So it's humanoid. And we also believe that these devices are listening to us and parsing what we say. In other words, that we think that they might be doing grammalepsis. They might actually be partaking of language. But that's up for debate. vectorless superpowers, Google, Apple, Facebook, Amazon, are able to factor programmatically artifacts based on a merely designative model of language, that's the systematic stupidity, as humanoid by synthesizing perceptible gestures that are socialized as voice, right? So your speaking, listening device makes gestures to you and seems to receive your gestures as if it's language, but it's not necessarily, not until it is. This, by the way, the socialization is the only thing that you can talk about seriously in relation to AI. AI is, obviously it's artificial. Is it intelligence? No, it's obviously not intelligence. It's something else. It's modeling something completely different. But the socialization of the gesturing algorithm, that's what makes it, that's why we call it AI now, and why AI is back in fashion. A crisis for artists of language. How will we, should we? And the should we is because maybe if you're into this, if you really want to go there, if you really want to partake of that world of virtual linguistic gestures that may not be language at all, and dive into it and make that the language of the future, well then maybe that's what we should do, or maybe we shouldn't. How should we continue to work and make art in voice as the substantive medium of language? And how should we distinguish our voices from the synthetic voices of the programmata? Right, so I published a book of essays, it's called Grammalepsy. You can get it for open access at this thing called Bloomsbury Collections, in case you want to read more. Right. Okay, so now that's that, and that's a sort of a polemic, but I do think of it as being a polemic that is very important for anybody who's working in the digital with language. And then I'm just going to show very briefly the things I'm working on at the moment, which is old work. And I'm going to, and this is just going to be purely casual. And it's also a commentary on the type of practice that these practitioners that I call digital language artists used to be called electronic writers, by me, still are called electronic writers. That if you make work in a sort of an apparatus, a supporting apparatus that's made with software, then as you know, it becomes obsolete very quickly. So some of the stuff that I made a long time ago is now completely unreadable because the techniques that supported it is gone. So I've been re-engineering pieces, which has been quite fun. And I get to see this piece, translation, big, for the first time. Because I re-engineered it in JavaScript, so it can now be a web app. And I'll be putting that out into the world. And it was also requested for an exhibition recently. So, translation. And I'll, really you're supposed to this is supposed to be ambient. Oh, I've got to plug in the sound. Hopefully that's in. So this is just the title screen. The scroll bars are coming up. I'm sorry about that. I didn't fix that in time. And now the piece. This isn't, as I say, it's an old piece. It's called Translation, and it's based on some quotations from Walter Benjamin's on language as such and the language of man, and it's a sort of aesthetic, poetic, ambient poetic commentary on translation as conceived by Benjamin, or an interpretation. So it's surfacing now in German. And then I could move it on, but it's the natural state of the piece is an ambient state. So now it's in its ambient state with the audio paused. And in this state, the different passages drift. They're all floating at the moment. Well, one is sinking. So the bottom passage is sinking. It's sinking in English. And the other passages are floating. Now the third one is sinking. So they randomly vary. And then there's a sonification that goes with it. The left side is just a map of the right side. The text, the part that you try to read or that has a sort of a relationship with reading, is on the right. And on the left is a sort of a visualization. And then there's a... And what's happening there is that if you looked at the left-hand side very carefully, you'd see a couple of little cursors running through it that are hitting the letters, and then as they hit the letters, they're sung in the language that that particular passage happens to be in at the time. Then if I so now it's going to surface in English, and you'll see exactly what's happening, because there's only so you can hear it spelling. So you get the idea. And that's really all I want to show you, except no, I'm going to show you a little bit more. And I'm not hiding the chrome. So, I've forgotten. Oh, here we go. Thank you, Git. I just wanted to highlight another aspect of the weirdness of our particular practice. Because so where's the studio? When somebody's going to do a studio visit, what do you show them? Which I think that's very difficult, because what happens is in the course of developing, and I'm sure this will be of interest to other colleagues, you come up with things like this.
Phao.
Oh. I'm going to...
Phao.
No, sorry. I'm going to... I'm not going to try and recover from that. What I'm saying is that in the course of developing, you come up with these weird hybrids, because you develop from one work to another work, and then you find the sonification you're using for one work you're applying in another work, and then you get very, very sort of strange versions of the sonification, or strange versions of the visualization. And I was thinking that those are my studio, but they mostly get covered over by the development. They get lost, and so there's nothing hanging on my walls, because I've moved on and I've developed towards the final piece. and I have very little left of all the weird sort of byways and spin-offs that were part of the development process. Okay, I'm going to stop there, and thanks very much for indulging me.
Okay, so thank you, John. We've come full circle, it seems. It's my pleasure to correctly introduce this time Merrily Armstrong Real, who is a New York-based artist, vocalist, and educator, whose work I think spans spirit and tech realms, ritual and virtuosity. I admire it a great deal as well. If you can't tell, I'm excited to be here. She performs as half of Human Beast and solo as Valise. Join me in welcoming Merrily.
Bear with me just a moment. There's going to be some slight flickering on the projection, just as a warning for anybody that might be bothersome to.
Do you mind helping me with the screen? Let me just raise the screen and the chairs are right there. Okay, easy.
Chairs and microphones and transfer discussion.
Where should we sit?
They'll just work and you can jump.
Thank you, each of you. First of all, that was beautiful. We probably have, I mean, you know, I won't rush anyone, but I'm sure we have a quarter hour or 20 minutes or so for questions. But I thought I might put a couple of things to the three of you first, and then we can open it up. I love this idea of kind of technological mediations of language and image as like a personal social tissue. John, you talk about socialization of text, and you used the kind of ad hoc sociality of this room, I think, and the arcane criteria of a user's desire to kind of sculpturize text. And this kind of like, how to say, oceanic shadow play. I mean, it leaves a lot to each onlooker. So I was curious about the status of the social. These are quite, I think, humanistic visions of poetry that a lot of people perceive to be quite technologically impersonable and impermeable. So I thought I might just start with a question about the broader theme of the social and where you locate that with reference to your projects.
I can start.
Yeah, please.
Well, for me, the social is a matter of is something which takes place chiefly in discourse amongst humans.
Mm-hmm.
But these days, I believe one of the ways of dealing with what's going on is that you can speak of entities, right? You can, or potentially socializable entities that we should, in Bruno Latour's term, we should welcome them. It means they have to be treated in their own terms. We don't get to anthropomorphize them. we have to discover them and then greet them, and then figure out how they relate to our ideas of sociality. So I do see that. I mean, in the talk I presented, that's there as a sort of as an aspect of language. So the social is implicated with language. In Jhave's work, there are entities, and there are echoes of voices. Where those voices come from, and whether they're our voices or voices that are being our voices being borrowed by entities, that's an interesting problem. And then in Maralie's work, I see that as, or in that particular work, that was one of those moments where within the audiovisual there was an entity, right? And an entity was being conjured and addressed, and brought to sort of so that we would have some relation with it, which in a lot of audiovisual work doesn't happen. It's just you just get, there's a concept, and that concept is being expressed by the audiovisual, and I think Maralie's work goes beyond that.
Thank you. I just said thanks.
Would you like to go?
I could. I don't feel like I have language right now to do so. Because engaging the social with that particular piece, I feel like usually when I present it, it's in a much less formal situation, and people are usually close enough where they can see what I'm doing on my screen. I often have smoke playing involved, and I didn't really want to bring it into here because I wasn't sure about the fire alarm. So, all these different sort of sensory elements come into play that get muted or changed or challenged depending on the venue. So the social I don't know, I'm just going to stop there.
It's a funny abstraction.
Yeah.
Somewhere John Berger refers to, like, the poetry in things is a presence. Before all language, there's a presence of something. Mm-hmm. And I think if we're talking about entities and artificial intelligence, I kind of agree with you, John, that the artificial intelligence is really rudimentary. There's really no entity there yet, except what we extrapolate or project or transpose onto it. And it's the same with this fluctuating light field and the fluctuating language field. I think we're reading fire in a way, or reading water. We're going back to the totemic origins of finding beauty in things. And the reason why I kind of made this participatory aspect of the rewrites is because I had a documentary film crew making a documentary on artificial intelligence and art, and they came to film me in my studio, but then at one point I invited the cameraman to try it, and after he'd finished, he said, "That was way more fun than watching you read this shit." and he's right, like, it's really the sort of, that's the socialization, that there's a capacity that's given to others, I think, by these algorithms, even if they are not entities. Mm-hmm. And in the same way, the light gives people this potential to be shamanic in some sense.
Yeah, definitely. And that's definitely an influence and an inspiration. I call it scrying. I'm using digital technology and this very rudimentary, like you were saying, going back to sort of water divination, and then thinking about the material of glass and how that has played a role throughout humankind in some way, for reading language, for receiving some sort of communication. And I've realized that I don't think a lot of people think about glass or think about how much we're actually just staring at glass. We call it the screen, but thinking about this material that is so prevalent, but it's invisible, yet brings so much into our vision. So, yeah.
That was certainly something I thought about, was the status of the screen. You were talking about the difficulty of the studio visit, and I mean, a lot of the objects you create are spatialized even when you go to their online presence, you know, and for each of you, I was very curious about the status of the screen as a surface for projection. But perhaps someone else, speaking of projection, has some questions. We have a microphone that we can ferry to you. Pardon?
Is it just floating?
Yeah, no, it's right there. There is a floating microphone. It's very bright.
Nobody has any questions?
Nobody has any
Nobody
questions.
wants to say anything or interrupt or anything? Interesting. Well, I could say a bit more about I should say, you know, welcoming the entities, that's one thing, but careful what you let in. The reason why, it probably comes across that I'm we were using the word this morning, curmudgeonly, and resistant to what I call transactive synthetic language, is because it's overdetermined by transactive sociality, right? By commerce and transaction, and the need to produce frictionless transactions, right? So the voice, which could be something that would be an interruption and an interesting encounter, just becomes an instrumental tool for getting things done, which is a nightmare. And if all of the sort of the engineering, not science, the engineering is going into that aspect, then we risk being bombarded with the presence of entities that are basically just very, very stupid and very, very uninteresting.
I think maybe that's even what I mean when I talk about the humanistic dimension of your respective practices, is something like the difference between empty and full speech. You know, you talk about oxymoronic raw data and so on. You know, it requires some kind of like subjective supplement or something like that, perhaps. That's wonderful. That's wonderful. Hello, Andrew.
Someone has to start.
Yeah. Okay. So I just start with a few questions. I want to thank you all for your performances, and I thought that was extremely invigorating to see some of the ideas float around here through sound and technology, and of course artificial intelligence, which is creeping everywhere. And I think it's just a basic question, because when I like the lexicon that's coming out of grammalepsy, and I think that's quite interesting to work. I haven't read the Bloomsbury piece yet, but I know I should look at it more closely when I get a chance, and I think it's really interesting. One of the things that I find puzzling about it, just when I think about it, I think, well, when I talk to scientists working with AI, and they often differentiate, between the sort of narrow AI that they work with. It's just the task getting done, and they say, you humanists, or you in the humanities, you're constantly looking at this vision that that you want something. We don't want anything. We just want to get the job done, and I think that's really interesting. And I thought maybe I could just sort of put that out as a general question, because getting the job done is working. The transactions are becoming frictionless. I find it's too much effort to pull cash out of my pocket now, and that worries me. So maybe just a few comments on that, speaking through your own works, your own ideas.
Well, the rewrites are essentially an attempt to reappropriate the transaction, the great commodification of our words and language, to bring it back into something that's playful and poetic. In the same way that I think light, to keep pulling you into this conversation, which is about language, but light at its origin has become commodified, right? Like we've got all these glittering advertisements that, since Claude Bernays came along and Madison Avenue sprouted and then got turned into boutique studios. We're all subjects of these very pernicious and effective modulations or reflexive intrusions upon our agency, which convert us from being autonomous subjects and make us, transform us into these partially automated consumers. And it's the same with language. Our language is being sifted and taken from us right from the inbox, right from where we speak to our friends and our family and our colleagues. It's being absorbed so that an alternate synthetic voice for ourselves is being established. And I think it's time for, and you've been talking about this for a long time, and I think by your gestures, you're doing it, is to really somehow, in small ways, reassume control and use the tools of the advertising industry in that alternate way.
Right, subverting them, misusing them.
Yes.
Yeah.
Or perhaps it's not a subversion, because if you're using light in a reverential, and you use the word invocation, which brings us back to the very ancient roots of poesis. Like, why do we do any of this? We do it because there's some sort of primordial field of unity which might emerge from poetry, which is kind of obscured behind the veil and fog of the apparatus of capitalism and subjectivity.
Yeah, that business of getting the job done is something that's very explicit. It's a bit unfair to say this, but I went to a talk yesterday about machine learning and NLP, natural language processing, and the degree to which it's something that requires testing to see whether it's worked is just it's astonishing that that's still happening. In other words, it's not really about reproducing what we do with language, because what we do is not captured anywhere. You know, there aren't really very many good data sets of what we actually do with language, and then there's the heavy overdetermination of the idea that language is basically just an extension of formal language. It's basically just an extension of a logical understanding of language. But that's not, it's demonstrable, because the NLP and the machine learning approaches to solving these problems doesn't work. And then the response to that is, doesn't work, well, we'll have to try harder until it does, rather than realizing you're looking at the wrong thing or you're doing the wrong thing if what you want to do is language. So the degree to which that's the case is hard to exaggerate, to the extent that it's not just that these engineers they're definitely not approaching language, but they're not even approaching linguistics. Right, so in other words, they just do something that performs linguistically, and they're not even referring to linguistics. They're not even no longer. It's all statistical, or it's pattern recognition from machine learning. So there's no reference to actual, even like a model, a historical model of language, which is weird. You just throw that out, right? And pretend that the science of language is just an engineering problem, and things. It may not go on like that forever, but it's an indication of how crazy things are with respect to language and computation, I think. And it's sort of it's part of our whole everything that we do, that underlying issue.
Perhaps someone commends engineering to the purposes of poetry if it's just about highly specific meta languages too, which is one cause for which we're here. How's the room feeling? We probably have a few more minutes if anyone is feeling curious. Or we can stop right on time. Okay, thank you so much, participants, and to all of you.